we good? And we're live. So, and I think this is the first time that I've given myself the challenge of welcoming you to what to me is one of the biggest events of the year without my cue cards. So all errors that will be conducted in the next 3 minutes are on me and my naive assumptions that I can actually do this without a cue card. My name is Pernille Berg. I'm Science Director at BloxHub, and I have to say it is such a delight to see you today. And for many reasons. One is that for quite an amount of years, I have wanted to introduce the keynote speaker I'm about to introduce. For also an abundance of years, I have been flabbergasted at the lack of vision in how our future can look. But I think this year, in the midst of what everyone is calling a polycrisis, it's as if that the human spirit has arisen, almost like the phoenix bird, and said, we will overcome. Because I have, since my partner in crime in this series of looking and addressing the regenerate, namely Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies and Nikolaj Svejstrup, when we started doing this, it was something must happen. Some of you also know that I curate with humility and honor a network called Circular Built Environment Network, where I have the pleasure of meeting people that actually research into doing the impossible and doing the formidable. And that makes me get up every day, and it also makes me look forward to today's like today, where addressing the regenerate is not only legitimate, but it is wanted, it's coveted, and it is shared. It's also, in a day like today, legitimate to address topics from various disciplines and actually listen with respect and veneration to what has gone before the research and knowledge presented today. Because only by learning from each other in what is a consilient way of approaching these wicked problems that we're facing, will we find the new tomorrow together. So when BloxHub and Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies decided to do this series of the Regenerate, we also wanted to address the tomorrow, the future, not just the now, but with the basis that we do it together. We do it based on knowledge, vision, courage, and insights and experience. So I reached out to a dear person to me, namely Professor Stefano Ponte from Copenhagen Business School, CBS, who's done amazing research over the past decades in value chain. And why did I do that? Because Stefano will immediately put forward the disclaimer and say, I'm not an expert in construction. No. But I did it because for such a long time, we've talked about a new growth paradigm. We've talked about a new way of addressing an economy, of transitioning. And we've talked about the complexity of the value chain within construction and also urban planning and urban development. But I was thinking, yeah, but we need someone who can really pinpoint the insights and the intricacies and the challenges and the pitfalls and the loopholes of the value chain. So Stefano, I reached out to you. Unfortunately, you said yes. I also reached out to some other wonderful people, and they will join us later on stage and virtually. But just to say hello already, I know that Geanne and Arthur, you're listening, and thank you for that. I will introduce you with as much care and veneration later. And Finn, for crossing the bridge, thank you. And you will also be introduced with proper veneration later. But for now, Stefano, please join me on stage. I will step down. And thank you for being with us today and for sharing your knowledge and your research with us I've really looked forward to it. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to Stefano.
Thank you. Am I on? Great. Thank you so much, Pernille. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks to, what's that? I need to stand over there. No, the clicker is. Oh, the clicker is over there. Okay. Here we are. Great. So, thanks to Pernille, Bloxhub, and to the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. Well, Pernille sort of hinted at that when she asked me, and I know where she works and what she does. I'm like, are you sure I'm the right guy? I mean, I know a lot of stuff on sustainability, but your network is really about urban planning, design, architecture, livable spaces. And indeed, she said, well, yes, actually, trust me. You can bring in something that we can use and we can debate together. So here I am. I'm not in the wrong room. I think I'm not in the wrong place. I've been convinced that I'm not, so it must be right. All right. I'm a professor at Copenhagen Business School. I'm a professor of international political economy. It means that I study the relations of power in the allocation of scarce resources, whether those are economic, financial, natural resources, human capital, you name it. So I'm lucky enough to be in a very multidisciplinary environment. I was trained as a political scientist, and then I did international relations, then I did development studies. I was lucky enough to be a working class boy who made it in the Ivy League in the US, and then at some point, so my partner is also a scholar. We had a small child. That was a long time ago. And we were thinking, where do we want to live? We could have stayed in the US. And we're like, sustainable living? Nah. We could have gone back to Italy, my place of birth. I'm like, nah. And so we were thinking, well, Scandinavia sounds interesting. And there's an approach towards quality of life. There's a functioning welfare state. There is a sense of equilibrium between working life and family life, which we had a small child, so that was important. So we came in 1999 to give it a try on a 2-year postdoc, and here we are, so 23 years later. So being invited in this space, for me, is very important because urban space of Copenhagen, the bike lanes, the quality of living, the culture, there are so many things that lined up in the right ways that kept us here, and happily so. I've been at CBS for 10 years now. Before I was at the Danish Institute for International Studies. And during this time, I've done quite a bit of research, not on urban spaces, but on trying to understand where things come from, the things that we consume, the materials that go into what we build. And so I'll lead you through, for a couple of minutes, some of the work that I've done so that you understand what is the angle that I come in with when we talk about, in the second part of my speech, and our conversation later on, about what I mean by just sustainabilities. Because the talk today is about global value chains and just sustainabilities. And by just, I mean not, oh, I need just 10 kroner, or, I just came home. No, just as coming from justice, so just and equal sustainability. So in my research, and I use the plural here because if anybody has done science or social science, it's never about the one person, right? We want to believe that there is always these kind of heroic individuals that are going to save the world. Yeah, they may contribute to something, but it's usually a collective effort. And even these individuals, and I will not make names, including those who now own the platform that I am thinking about whether I should stay or not in social media. They build on a lot of collective effort, public money, basic research, and then bring it forward. But it's always about the we. I worked with maybe 30, 40 different people in order to bring this knowledge together. So it's not me here. I'm just a voice of this group. I happen to live here. I happen to know Pernille, so here I am. So we follow goods from production to consumption and the loops in the circular economy. It's great fun. It's a lot of work. I usually work in the global south, mostly East Africa, Southern Africa, Southeast Asia, a little bit in Latin America, some in Europe. I spent a lot of time in East Africa. I speak Swahili fluently, so I feel like it's a second place for me. And I talk to farmers in the middle of nowhere in Tanzania talking about coffee and climate change, a project that we're doing now at CBS, all the way to the boardrooms of major corporations and with CEOs of these corporations that import or sell those products that very often originate in the global south or are assembled in places that are not in Europe or North America. So I go from speaking Swahili to the farmer all the way to wearing a suit, a little bit more formal than today, with the CEO. And when I started in '99, issues of sustainability, yes, they were starting to pop up. But when I asked questions, especially up at the top end in consumption and retailing, to CEOs and managers, they were like, oh yeah, sure, sustainability. We have the CSR office, it's next to the toilet, next to HR. It gave you a sense of, oh yeah, sure. We may have somebody, we need to tick that box. Fast forward, by now I just came back from a month in South Africa working on the wine industry and also in the global north in the global wine industry. And sustainability is center of strategy, is center of the discussions in boards. So it has become something that we can't look away from. But how we do that, how do we tackle, especially global sustainability challenges, varies a lot. So it's easier for me to do my work today. People are not rolling their eyes, it's like, well, doesn't matter. Now it's like, oh, everybody does it, and therefore nobody does it. There's a lot of greenwashing. There's a lot of social inequality. There's a lot of labor issues that are embedded in the things that we consume. So my job is to, from a scientific perspective, to look through all the various passages in the value chain and ask questions about who does what, and look at relations of power and how value is created and also appropriated and redistributed in all these passages. I worked on coffee and many other products, but I also worked on issues related to shopping and us as consumers. And that's a book I wrote with my partner, actually. And that was the toughest test in our marriage, I think, writing a book together. So fortunately, it worked okay. The book is great, and we're still married, so I guess it went okay. The idea here was, okay, even if we bring a product in the best way possible to the consumer, how do we then, as consumers, approach being good consumers? Can we really save the world through consumption? And so we wrote a book called Brand Aid, Shopping Well to Save the World, to highlight the contradictions of us buying more and more things that are sold to us with the marketing strategy of we're going to take a percentage of our sales or of our profit and donate it to NGOs who are going to buy HIV/AIDS medication in the global south, or set up water wells. And this kind of thing that is called cause-related marketing was at the infancy at the time when we wrote this book. It was mostly an American thing. Same story. Oh, yeah, Americans, they sell everything in any way we want. Fast forward, you find it everywhere now, even in Denmark. So it's actually become quite difficult to find something to buy where you don't actually help anyone in one way or another. It's through a project, which we are like, okay, well, if you want to help producers, why don't you pay them more, as opposed to build the school for them? And what does it mean to then make us as consumers as heroes? I'm saving the world through my purchase. So that is part of the work they have been doing. I will not cover all this stuff today. I'm going to go straight into global value chains in a moment. But I've also done some work on sustainability certifications. Some of them are really good, others are problematic. And if I don't touch too much in the presentation, please ask me later. I'll be happy to discuss all those certifications that you find in your Organic Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, Marine Stewardship Council, Forest Use. You have these certifications and labels on almost everything now, especially at the consumer level. And very recently, I just finished a big project in Tanzania with colleagues at the University of Dar es Salaam. We were looking at different kinds of sustainability partnerships and what they actually do, top-down versus community-based, bottom-up. What do they do on handling issues that have to do with conservation, the environment, and the livelihoods of people who are living in the same area where you want to conserve forest or fish or wild animals. Finally, I do examine to what extent the green economy helps us to solve global sustainability issues. And I will come back in the second part of my talk about this particular issue. That is the big picture. So, I have two parts in my talk today. One is the more nitty-gritty, the kind of stuff that Pernille wanted me to talk about. So what does it mean, to be more sustainable in global value chains? And I could stay here for a week with you and telling you all the details, but I'll give you the sort of the big picture that comes from a book that I just published 2 or 3 years ago. Actually, before COVID, it feels like yesterday. It's already been 3 years, and I was like, well, gosh, 3 years is already old. No, it's not old, but it feels like it. So the book is called Business, Power, and Sustainability. You'll see the cover in a moment. The bigger picture, though, I really want to unpack with you, which is actually included in the last chapter of the book, is to try to start imagining answers to the questions of what sustainable development do we want? Is the green economy enough? And how do we move towards what I call, and this is not my name, it's being used in many, many other situations, just sustainabilities. And the last part is really about ideas. It's really about my interpretation of what you wanted to see in terms of future imaginations, rather than, oh, if it hasn't been tried so far, it means that it won't work. Well, if we don't start thinking out of the box, then it won't work, okay? And I think that this is just to open up the realm of possibility within which you, I'm sure, will jump in with a lot of great ideas and things that you have done already. There's a lot of innovation going on in this field, but also a lot of structural limitations for which you need a new imagination and a new vocabulary to get over. All right? Are you ready? Okay. So the first part is that's my bread and butter of what I get paid for, is to do this work, and then I teach it at Copenhagen Business School, right? So what are global value chains, and how do they operate, and why do we need to understand those dynamics if we want to understand the limitations and possibilities of a sustainable future? This one got off. I can't see the screen here now. Thank you. I can turn my head, I guess, but it's not so elegant, eh? All right, so it says no signal. Anyway. The screen is on, but there's no signal. Yeah. All right. Anyway, so the big questions that the book handles, and that's the cover of the book, is business really helping to solve global sustainability crisis? And how, and to what extent, in what situations? So this is not an anti-business book. It's how do we get so far within the limitations of business in the way that it operates, as of we understand now normal operations, right? And in those processes of trying to handle that, who wins, who loses, geographically, by gender, by race? What are the roles of public policy and activism in this context? This is the part of the book I will not cover today, because I'll go into the big ideas directly. And indeed, what are the possible alternative models of the economy that can help addressing these global sustainability challenges? So the first question that I would like to mystify for you, global value chains are really simple. It's really about following the product and power relations and the activities that go along the value chain and closing the loops in terms of the various circular economy backwards linkages. So one could one could actually see a complex system, or one could actually make it into a linear analysis and take all the bits and pieces and see who does what and in what ways. But then, of course, it's more than a linear thing because there are all these kind of backward loops. So the analysis itself is to understand who calls the shots, who decides along the value chain, what companies do decide, what other companies do along the value chain, at what terms, volume, quality, price, delivery types, etc. And what does it mean in terms of creation of value, and what does it mean in terms of the way in which we handle environmental and social issues? The book is mostly on environmental issues. I tried to do both, but I had only 1 year of leave from my teaching, and I could only write that one book. The social book, there is a lot of really good work. I didn't integrate it because I otherwise would have been too superficial. That does not mean that social issues are less important. If anything, they're more. So in relation then to, then we look at upgrading. How do we come into a situation, for example, in the Global South, where you have farmers or small producers that are operating these value chains? How can they improve their performance technologically, in terms of profit, in terms of quality, in terms of the way in which they process products, the way in which they sell geographic origin, or branding even. So in sort of more technical terms, we talk about upgrading. How do we upgrade in terms of economic returns, in terms of social conditions of production, especially in relation to labor, and then in relation to environmental issues? How can we improve the environmental procedures that we have, or the impacts, as we operate on the value chain, without necessarily presenting you with a poorer product or a more expensive one? And that is the issue. I'm going to come back to it. The more expensive one. Because environmental upgrading usually makes it more expensive for farmers and small producers to operate. We like what we get. They need to spend more, invest capital, and the global buyers, the retailers and the branded merchandisers in the global north, they pay the same price. Last year you brought me X, now it's X plus sustainability certification. Sort it out. Price is the same. Ooh. I just came back from South Africa, as I said. This is like a major thing now. Everybody wants a carbon calculation and a carbon neutral path, and nobody wants to pay for it. And wine farmers are like, what? They operate at 3% net profit rate, which is very, very low. And if you start attacking on that, then they close down, essentially. So I'm going to highlight some of these issues, hopefully, in a little bit of detail. So what do we do? As I said, we follow the value chain. We try to understand the relations in between various nodes in the value chain, and then the impact in societies and environments where these operations take place. I didn't put all the loops here not to make it too complicated. And then we look at, if you put out the value added as you move from research and development to design, purchasing, production, distribution, etc., okay? This is an aggregate graph, but in general, essentially the lowest value added is on production or assembly. So if you want to have higher value added, you need to move this way or that way, or find ways to lift the whole smiley curve, as it is called, up. This is not easy, okay? And the smile curve in the 60s and 70s was very flat. And now it's becoming deeper and deeper. So if you're stuck here, you may have created jobs, of course. You may create foreign exchange, great. Assembly of your iPhone is here. It's done in China, Foxconn, big company, problematic labor sources. But when you export that phone to Europe, most of the content in that phone has been actually added somewhere else. Taiwan, Germany, and then the big chunk, of course, in California, because the intellectual property rights are the major chunk. So, empirically, in the book, so it was a mid-career crisis book. I've been working on this for a long time. bits and pieces. I was like, what does he mean altogether? So I spent a year trying to figure it out. And I put together, at that time it was 20, now it's almost 25 years of research. And in the book, I have a very deep analysis of wine, coffee, and biofuels. I guess I like liquid forms. I don't know. I like coffee, I like wine. Biofuels, no. Biofuels I added because 10 years ago it was our way of saving the world, right? If you remember? Biofuels, everybody, we're going to put them into our cars and all that. And now it's green hydrogen, of course. Biofuels are like out. Green hydrogen made with electricity or power that is converting hydrogen through solar and wind. I also worked on shipping and aviation because I wanted to compare agro-food value chains that are usually labor-intensive and nature-intensive with big industries that are capital-intensive and have mobile assets. I will not tell you much today, but if you're curious again in the discussion, we can discuss it. I'm just going to do impression management here. You don't need to read. Okay? I'm just telling you what I did in this book is to go through these value chains and try to understand the different kinds of power that are operating in each node of the value chain and try to understand why things are the way they are. And I do that by looking at different kinds of power, okay? So bargaining power, which is the realm of economics, between firms or between firms and the state. Institutional power, this is like political science, kind of collective regulation, multi-stakeholder initiatives, business associations. While on this side is more diffuse ways of in which power operates. And this is the realm of ideas, accepted ideas, and how they travel. First in copying from each other, and then becoming the new normal in constitutive power. So this I draw a lot from sociology. You'll be happy on that. So this is about ideas. And why is it important? Because when we think about policy, if a value chain is actually shaped or has been shaped a lot by ideas, and we only go into the bargaining power, so antitrust regulation, or institutional power by setting up certain rules in order to shape it in a different way, and we're missing this, then it won't work. And I show that in the book over and over. And regulators and public orchestrators, public authorities are getting better at this, especially in the EU. The EU is regenerating new ideas. And finally, it has become clear that in addition to regulation, you also need to set up the new points of reference. And that's why the talk today was very interesting to me, because this process is part of it. Like, how do you legitimize ideas and ways of approaching how we handle sustainability crisis? So my publisher said, listen, you need to have a one-liner. You need to be able to say, what is the book about? And I'm like, oh, I can do that. I can do it in 4 words. They were so happy. So the book is really about green capital and brown environment. Brown, dirty. Right? Green, What does it mean? Okay. And because I'm a scholar, 4 words don't cut it for me. It's okay for social media. It's fine. And I get attention, and then I engage in more words. Okay, this is like, I will never show this slide to a general public, but I really want to. So this is my book in a page. So sustainability has become key in understanding contemporary capitalism. As I said before, it's in the boardroom. It has become also acceptable to use sustainability to extract value from your suppliers. While in the past you could do it, but not talk about it, now it's all the rage. Like, it's the new strategy. It's like, oh, you get to know more about your suppliers because you ask them all these questions about your carbon emissions and all that. And by doing that, you know their cost structures, therefore you can pay cost plus a tiny margin. So you can push them, extract more value for yourself. It's become completely normal. The business case for sustainability 10 years ago is like, oh, but if you can make money and this and that, come on. You can use sustainability in any which way you want and still create value for yourself and distribute it to your shareholders if you want to take that route. And that's been shown over and over again. So that means that you can maximize green capital accumulation even if you say, oh, this is all about stakeholder capitalism, you know, in theory, we moved from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism. Some big companies are generating this idea. I think that's great. But I think we're still in the shareholding part in which we are creating and capturing new value through sustainability management. And of course, it's great to have portfolio diversification. I had 4 or 5 products, now I have 15 because I have all these other things that are green, and I have new products that weren't there before. And then I minimize reputational risk. Because if I have a label and a certification on my product, if anything happens, well, I had a certification. If the certification went bad or the auditor made a mistake, not my fault, right? So it's great. Minimizing risk is important in business, of course. At the same time, what you have here is what I observed in the Global South, a squeeze on suppliers. So you use sustainability to squeeze value out of suppliers or to ask for more and pay the same. And that is a redistributional issue. So all the nice things that we're having, at least those that are coming from the Global South, chances are that that value was created close to production and then appropriated as we move towards consumption. It's a big deal. Because it means that we are getting greener but more unequal. And if we take sustainability in a broader sense, like just sustainability, that won't do. Not only that, there is very little to show on the environment. Yes, there are very good cases. In most of the industries I looked at, we actually don't know what the impact is on the environment of all these sustainability initiatives and certifications. Now we're starting to do more in understanding the impact, and it's finally coming out that the picture is quite mixed. There are very good examples of positive impact on the environment, many others that are not. The important thing is to keep pressuring to know. If you make a claim that you have done X, then you show me what the impact of X is on the environment or on workers or etc. Okay, how much time do I have left? 10. Okay. Perfect. So the bigger picture in 10 minutes. So I'm just going to plant a seed here, and then I hope that I push you enough that you're going to get all up in arms and say, this is bullshit, or, yeah, let's go that way. Or what I hope is that you don't just ignore it. So three steps. What kind of sustainable development do we want? Is the green economy enough? How do we move towards just sustainability? I would like for you to read this and guess who said that. I don't have a prize, but you get a clap or something. Is it an NGO? University professor? A small farmer? The associates should give it out. Who's calling their employees associate? Walmart. Okay? And this was like back in 2005. Walmart, through some of their consultants, they understood that they could make money out of sustainability. And then also frame it in a way, we are big, we can make a difference. Let's turn the perception around. How about this one? Of course. And it's in between these two that I really want to kind of try to find a space in which, yes, we can use the resources and power of business without engaging in violence, like Vandana Shiva would say. So, these are the two most famous representations of what sustainable development is in the current era. The SDGs, the 17 plus all the various sections and indicators, 144, and then the planetary boundaries. And the planetary boundaries, when they came out, it was quite revolutionary. It was essentially saying, but there is an outer boundary on CO2 ocean acidification. We cannot go beyond that. Therefore, we have a budget, we have to divide it up and make sure that we stay under it, also including historical trajectories of how we got there for CO2. It's quite important, as you have heard from COP27. Then others are taking further steps in the sense of, okay, we do have these boundaries, but those boundaries, we can't work in trying not to overcome them without understanding what is the social foundation upon which our economy and society are based. And so if we are good at handling climate change and then we make all this other stuff worse, then we're just not doing the right thing. And so Kate Raworth, who was at Oxford, now it's University College London, she devised the donut, okay? So this is the safe and just space for humanity in which we maintain the basic social compact of society, and we work on these environmental issues in combination. I really like it as an idea, and I think it's been quite influential. The how-to is where we are not there yet, okay? And that's where I want to move. Another big debate is about growth, degrowth, neutral growth, blah, blah, blah. And it tends to be, people are either for or against growth, and I don't understand that. It really depends on what do we mean by growth. As we measure it now, it's a disaster. So if I pollute, it doesn't have any impact on GDP. If I send a company to clean it up, it has a positive impact on GDP. I mean, how wrong is that? And ecological economists have devised different ways of measuring GDP for a very long time. We're not using them. Why is that? And so rather than with or without is what kind of society and environment, welfare, happiness we want to have in our society. That is the question. It's not growth per se. Otherwise, we have immiserizing growth, which is Rafi Kaplinsky's book that he wrote on these places where there's a lot of economic growth and really miserable labor conditions. What's the point, right? Okay, so in the book I'm saying, well, we really have a situation of unjust sustainability now. We're tackling sustainability somewhat, but it's not going the right way, and it has a million other kind of negative impacts, and overall is not just. So we have ways in which you can create and capture value, like the argument that I made in terms of green capital accumulation. We have a lot of technological and organizational fixes that we can use to do that, from Industry 4.0 into new forms of sharing. There are now wonderful digital platforms in which we can reuse and reshare. It's all fantastic. But if you just take that as the solution, then we're going to have a problem, because we are still plugging into an economic system that is based on maximizing production and consumption. So the issue here is that we're getting a lot better in terms of the unit efficiency of materials and energy. We're consuming less to produce the one item, but we're consuming a lot of items. More items than what we save by being more efficient. So at the end of the day, we're not solving the long-term problem. We're getting much better at doing the individual unit analysis, unit sustainability. And sustainability is also about inequality, okay? So probably you've seen this before. This is the Milanovic and Lackner famous elephant that tells you essentially with globalization what happened in relation to inequality, who won and who lost in the period of globalization from the 80s to at least before the financial crisis. And the answer here, the global middle classes, especially in India and China, but also in parts of Africa, have won. Okay, this is the income growth in between 80 and 15, I think. Here's the middle class in Europe, North America, and other places, and that's why you have populism. Here's the your 1%, obviously, and you're the very poor in Africa. So that's a story about inequality. Put sustainability on that, and you get a similar story, but with different flavors. I don't have time to go through the dynamics of that, but in general, global producers in the global south not making much in terms of value addition. We consumers are getting cheap stuff now, even sustainable. Global capital, very good, even green. And so there are some really interesting and important dynamics that we need to keep in mind when we talk about sustainability. All right, agency. As I said before, you as a consumer can make a lot of difference, yes, of course, and it's also motivating, right? But I've never seen, okay, I'll give you one example from Denmark. Until about 7 or 8 years ago, in Denmark you had no sustainable fish that was certified. Now you go to Co-op or Irma, and most of the fish has the blue fish on it, Marine Stewardship Council. That is not because there were pickets of people outside saying, we want sustainable fish, consumers, or consumers saying, I will not buy fish until, No, the 3 main supermarket chains sat down with WWF and some other NGOs, and they made an agreement among themselves cooperatively to source only sustainable fish. So the agency of consumer, yes, the agency of those 3 buyers, those supermarket chains, a lot more agent than any of us put together. I highly recommend that you read this book, Michael Mann. He's a scholar, but he writes for the general public as well. And his argument is we need to get beyond this individualistic approach to sustainability. It's all good. You want to eat vegan, you want to eat sustainable, please do so. But let's not judge each other. Oh, I went by train, you went by plane, I'm better than you. And basically he says that is a disruptive politics that takes us away from collective action in the political realm. And that is essentially in 3 lines what he is trying to write in that book. It's a very powerful book. We had him as a presenter also at CBS. It's a very, very strong arguments that go along that. The third point I want to make here is about taxation. The same companies that are saying we are now doing sustainable things may be placing their profits in low taxation jurisdictions. By doing that, they take away resources that could be taxed and used by the state to solve some of the social and environmental issues. So there is a question about what does it mean to be sustainable if you do this thing and then you're trying to place all your intellectual property rights in Ireland, because of course they're taxing only 12%. So we need to think about taxation and about tax havens and about wealth management. And I'm lucky enough to have 2 great colleagues at CBS who are really on to this. And I highly recommend it if you're interested in this kind of stuff, read their stuff. They also write on Politiken quite often on these kind of issues. Give me a sign here because I can go forever. I'm good? All right. Okay, so who has not heard about the Anthropocene? No, who has heard about the Anthropocene? Perfect. So the idea is that, since the Industrial Revolution, we've been essentially shaping our geological era. That won't do. There is an interesting movement in the movement of ideas saying, well, we're actually calling it wrong. It is not humanity that is a problem. It's how we have organized our economy to extract natural resources and distribute profits to capital that is the problem. And therefore, the problem is capitalism as we know it, and therefore we need to change something there in order to get out of this proposition. So Anthropocene also has some reflections upon we are too many in the world. And of course, we just turned 8 billion, but who are we, right? A person in Denmark or in the US, how many CO2 emissions do we have per year vis-a-vis a person in Bangladesh? So let's not take that road. Plus, the demographic transition is already happening in Africa, it's happening in India, it has happened in China for a long time ago. So the idea again is then, if we then look at the issue as how we organize the economy, then instead of going against people, we try to fix that system or go beyond it. So one of the ways in which we can think about this is the concept of just sustainability. And I've taken this, Julian Egeman, he's done with many other people, some really interesting work back, and this goes back to the early 2000s, really. And so why don't we think about just sustainability, about ensuring a better quality of life, not growth, necessarily, now into the future, so intergenerational issues, in a just and equitable manner, while we live within the limits of supporting ecosystems. So you find the planetary boundaries, they creep through that. But there is a strong element of justice and inequality, or equality rather. So then just sustainabilities are trying to move towards that, is about addressing inequality, is about thinking about well-being rather than growth per se, or economic growth as we know it. It's about what is sufficient, what is enough, as opposed to maximizing consumption. It's about a more diversified economy that also brings in more, like stronger elements of community and cooperative economy. It's also about public consumption. Denmark has a fairly large percentage of total consumption that comes from the public, and do it in a better way, so that we get indeed the entrepreneurial state that Mariana Mazzucato is advocating, but it is not just green, but it's green and just. And therefore, it's about reimagining needs, present and in the future. What do we need? What is that brings us satisfaction and quality of life and well-being? I am in my mid-50s, and I'm starting to ask questions about what did I do in this life? And that's a question that I don't want to be remembered in that generation, or those generations that knew and didn't do enough. And so I'm going to leave you with these 3 points that are the takeaways for us, and also for the discussion later on. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Patrick, can we leave those on? Oh, Stefano, don't go. That's okay. Good. Just,
Up here.
no, I just thought, just for clarification, and before everyone is like going, oh, all right. Thank you. On that note, we're all sitting here, what will we be remembered as? Before, we will have a small break, and then we'll actually have a debate. But we have, I think it's only fair to questions, comments, wondering, and then I will ask Jule maybe to bring a microphone to help me out. Here we're being spontaneous and very close to each other from stage. Thank you. Because we have a question.
Thank you. My name is Charlotte.
Hi, Charlotte.
Thank you, Stefano, for a very nice presentation of your work. I mean, this is like the question that I hope we all ask ourselves. So I'm just so interested in what do you do besides you are actually showing the world that this is necessary? Because I keep on asking myself that question almost every day. What more can I do? I teach sustainable by design, sustainable design strategies to students from American universities. So I'm like, what do I do? Do I go out and buy a piece of agricultural land and then renature it and show small ways of living so we don't use up so many square meters? But I mean, I'm keep on, because it's the whole system. I mean, we need to reverse it 180 degrees. And that is the difficult part, to actually figure out where to put these acupuncture needles down in order for change to start to happen. I mean, I also see change happening, but the major systems that you're talking about, the economy and the global economy, is actually a huge part of the problem, and the value chains are so long, so it's so difficult to kind of, figure out how to stop them. Does that make sense?
That's a huge question. We could go on for hours with this, but what I would like...
I'll come and drink coffee with you on CBS.
Yes. What I would like to turn it a little bit is to say, what can we do? Because I think that is really disempowering to think about I as an individual in such a system, right? And of course, there are things that are within our control and things that we can do every day on an everyday life that provides meaning to the way in which we live and we relate to each other. But I think that there's more in the political realm, right? Because the structural issues we can't change as individuals, right? And that starts with ideas. So, for example, the idea that a B Corp doesn't have to necessarily go back and return shareholder value. If you didn't do it in a normal corporation, you could actually have your lawyers coming at management and say, you're failing the articles of incorporation. Now you have a way, and there's been a long battle, to legally be able to make that argument. You can use it in many different ways, and I'm not saying that this is like the revolution is in here, but there is one very important ideational movement. Because when you start that, then you can justify returning more value to your suppliers, for example. Now with COVID and the Ukraine war, we're talking about resilient value chains as opposed to just in time, just in case, long-term relationships. How do you build these instead of jumping from one place to another? The car industry has taken a big hit because they were the first to jump off during COVID from the semiconductor and the electronics producers, especially in China and Taiwan. They didn't pay for their for orders that they made already. They didn't want to receive this stuff. They said, "Oh, sorry, Then demand picks up, and the supplier said, "Well, everybody else is in the queue. Go in the back of the queue, right?" And so there is something there about relations, and that is less of the kind of casino capitalism that we have had for a long time. But I'm not answering your question here. What I'm just highlighting here is that the idea that we can and should have more cooperative systems, that we have the right kind of public consumption, that corporations should be not just at the service of shareholders, is a good place to start.
You're welcome.
I know I'm falling short here of the other many things that I would like for us to discuss, and I would like for you to bring your experiences as well, because I am in the same position. I teach my students this stuff, and a few of them, went on to do things, and the guy who was too good to go. He was in my class, and many others have gone and done interesting things, and I am in awe with them. But I also see that they are within a system that really kind of constrains what can be done.
And at a meta level, you also have criteria for the people that you collaborate with in research projects. But that's for the break. But because I know you won't toot your own horn, so I'll do it. So you have strategies on research collaboration that are actually quite empowering in terms of agency and what you do in that regard.
I've been able to do that after, I'm senior enough now. I can choose who I can work with.
Yeah. We have another question? Yes?
Yep,
Thank you.
I would like to raise a question. So that was very interesting, and I kind of come to the conclusion that we are not changing fast enough. So I was wondering what you think of more disruptive activism towards trying to, for example, blocking oil pipes and trying to give more space for uprooting communities to develop kinds of lifestyles that not depend so much on fossil fuels.
I'm not a social activism scholar, so I'm just answering from my own kind of perspective here. This is my politics, right? There is a lot of really interesting work out there that shows that you need both the NGOs and social movements that collaborate, right? The WWF is of the world, right? Business partnerships, and they've done quite a good bit. But you also need the Greenpeaces, right? The Greenpeace, attracting attention and being disruptive. So I think that both are necessary, because otherwise, as you said, you answered your own question. Otherwise, change will not take place fast enough.
And we have a question from the back, Toge.
Hello, and thank you for a very good overview of the sort of various approaches to this. But you had two names up there, Kate Raworth and Milanovic, who are right now in a, let's say, a discussion around the concept of degrowth. How do you see the degrowth fitting into this, given both the need for just transition and equality, economic equality, as well as the planetary boundaries?
It's an easy question.
No, I mean, I tried to answer your question earlier. Obviously, I failed to do so because you're asking me. But I actually think that the issue with the degrowth is that we're still talking about growth in a way that we normally conceive it, right? So as GDP. So at that point, I don't think there is a problem with having constant growth with depletion of the environment. It can be okay in the midterm, but in the long term, not only we'll all be dead because we don't live more than 80, 90 years, but our next generations will not be able to sustain themselves. But I think what needs to be done instead is to redefine what is growth in a well-being, in the context of well-being, right? How do we have economic activity that still produces meaningful jobs without destroying the environment and provides the well-being to people that are engaged in economic activity? And that is where the key issue is. So if I redefine growth as well-being, that has a component of economic growth as well, then I'm like, yes, let's grow it. But then we need to measure all the externalities. We need to measure all the carbon emissions as negative externalities. We need to measure the carbon that we consume here that comes from Vietnam or other places. It's too easy for Denmark to say, oh, we cut our emissions. Well, wait, yes. Urban spaces, energy, fantastic. Wind, yeah. But then all the stuff that comes from outside, we basically moved some of that carbon in places where they're producing it there. And now when we import, we need to make amends with that. Whether that is carbon adjustments at the import level or other mechanism is open for debate. To be continued?
Otherwise, we'll take one last question, and then we'll let everyone get a fresh cup of coffee.
Yeah, super interesting, all of that. I was really intrigued by this donut thing. And it made me wonder how these, I don't know, let's call it speculative economics. I don't know if that field is a thing. But at the same time, you said that the real problem is that we cannot really translate them into action, and the how to donut is the real problem. But then again, you also say that it's super important that we have these spaces to create alternatives. So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
I hope I didn't say that you cannot translate the donut in actions. It's that the model itself doesn't tell you how to get there, but it's a point of reference, and for that, I think it's really fantastic. But you can build that safe space in very many different ways. And as you mentioned, one of the biggest things that are changing now is in the financial sector, right? So finance used to be completely agnostic about how we do it with the environment, and now we have a lot more screening and sort of green indices and investments. Therefore, there is also the financial sector that you cannot see in that donut because it's coming everywhere in all the investment decisions, is trying to make a difference. I'm not trying to make too much out of it because there's a lot of greenwashing in ESG and finance. However, the discourse has changed. Now, we're nearing the end of the year. I can tell you that those of us who have green indices, they're not going to be happy because we're going to lose about 10% of our pension fund this year. Those who have pension funds that are into oil and gas, they'll be very happy, made a lot of money this year. So at the end of the day, there's sort of big questions that are around that donut that have to do with finance and the importance of finance. We had a roundtable with some of the pension fund and asset managers about a week ago, and also from their insider view, people that we actually trained years back and are now in the financial sector and trying to move this forward and bumping into kind of these problems with the benchmark of other people who are not doing the green stuff and making more money at the end of the day, unless you discount that those profits that have been made through destroying the environment, you're going to be looking bad if you compare with the green indices, right? Again, I'm not very good at answering these questions because the issues are so big, but I hope at the very least that I provide you some place where one may look.
And I think we will leave it at that and reconvene in 15 minutes, because then we will bring Finn Williams on stage, Geanne Van Arkel and Arthur Huang, and then we'll have a debate across exactly the disciplines from the city architect to the business strategist and the designer and architect, business founder with a global perspective. So let's give a huge round of applause to Stefano. Thank you. Thank you so much. And see you back here in 15 minutes. Shall we?
Yeah.
Do you want to join me again, Stefano? Do you want to join me? Don't forget your mic.
Is mine on? You're right up there.
Yeah. All right. The advantages of having hybrid sessions is that we can bring people with us from afar. The disadvantages of hybrid sessions is that those of us who are together physically become caught up in the moment, and the cake and the coffee are tempting and wonderful. But it is time for our debate, and we have with us laughter in the background. But I will actually start with introducing you guys, also because I know, Arthur, it's actually late in the day where you're at. So,
Yes.
Yes. So the last time I introduced you, I read all of your achievements, and it sent me home. So I'm not going to do that today, because you told me I shouldn't, so I won't. But Arthur, you're with us, and Arthur Huang, you have worked within the circular economy for many years. You are also participating in the documentary Going Circular. And I'll get back to that documentary at some point in the debate, because you shared with us some of your experiences and epiphanies during your life, as Stefano has shared with us earlier today. So thank you very, very much for being with us. Geanne Van Arkel, a huge welcome to you. I have befriended you through social media. And as Arthur will share with you afterwards, now you won't get rid of me. But as a business strategy, you have done amazing work within the regenerative and actually within transitioning. So thank you so much for being with us today, and I look very, very, very much forward to hearing your reflections on some of the things that Stefano shared with us in the keynote. Stefano, I've introduced you, so suffice it to say I'm happy that you stuck around for the debate. I think it's going to be a really cool debate. I've also been telling people, ask questions now, comment, engage, because this is what makes for a good debate. I have loads of questions, but you tend to actually ask better questions than me. So help me out, please. And Finn Williams, city architect of Malmö, and I've been reading interview with you and your visions of what to do with Malmö. And I've actually had Malmö as my pit stop hub when I commuted to Lund. And Malmö is actually quite dear to me. It's across. I commuted to Lund before we had the bridge. And I have a friend with me actually from my days at Lund University. And we've actually weathered the waters, as it were, when they were not ready for a speedboat. So Finn, thank you very, very much for being with us here today. You have so many visions. And I'm looking, now you're with us, and you're actually the only kind of city architect representing the urban scale in the midst of a researcher in global value chain, knowing a lot about business and certifications, and then Arthur and Geanne. So given that, I think it's only fair to let you have the first go. When you heard Stefano, you're sitting there as a city architect, and basically what we also heard was that there is a lot of possibilities in public procurement in terms of green and just procurement. My words, not. So as you listen to Stefano and thinking of the future of the we, not what you can do, but we, what were some of your, looking back as a city architect, I'm actually doing this?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you, Stefano, for a fantastic opening to this. I mean, as the architect, I can't help thinking of value chains in bricks and mortar and at a spatial scale. And I suppose as architects, whether you're working on the public sector side or on the private sector side, specifying the materials that go into a building, I think it's fair to say the industry is becoming more and more conscious and aware of everything we put into buildings and the supply chains that lie behind them. And partly that's because of a climate emergency all around us, but it's obviously been exacerbated and clarified by those crises you talked about. From a UK perspective, I moved to Malmö a year and a half ago. We were already very aware of supply chains through Brexit. And then we had of course, COVID and the Ukraine crisis, and suddenly these materials that would appear at the click of a button were nowhere to be found. And it made, I think, architects starting to pull at that thread of what are the value chains, the supply chains that lie behind these materials on my screen, become increasingly aware of the externalities that surround a building but aren't, or a place, but aren't necessarily very visible. And the fact that so many of the true costs of building are paid for by people outside our city, outside our country, elsewhere around the world. And I think that's led to this kind of movement, whether you call it regenerative architecture or non-extractive architecture, which is a challenge that architects increasingly, putting on ourselves in the industry, which is how can we build in a way that doesn't generate these negative externalities, these costs that others pay, or how can we reel in that supply chain and understand the true costs of what we're doing right here and now. And in somewhere like Sweden, that's particularly challenging because we've got a very centralized construction industry. We've obviously got a global kind of flows of materials and waste. And to really kind of repackage all the supply chains that lie behind, for example, a building like this and understand their true costs, incredibly complex task. But I think it is interesting to compare, say, where all the true costs of this building fall. And I should admit that I worked for the practice that designed this building, not on this building, but back in 2004, and they certainly weren't conversations that were being had then. With, say, the negative externalities or the external costs of the old Danish architecture centre, that little yellow local vernacular building that's just across the road or just behind this building. And the footprints of those two buildings in terms of cost are just completely different things. And I think what we're trying to do at Malmö now is as far as possible, trying to understand how we can use the resources we have at hand, not just in terms of materials, but also skills and expertise, the local economy, to drive an architecture that's more relevant and more embedded in Malmö as a place. Because that's also central to trying to understand, and I'll stop now, but to trying to develop an architectural identity that is connected to a place and people feel like they belong to. Because when we're simply building prefabricated materials that are shipped over from other places around the world and dropping them on somewhere like Malmö, those buildings and those places don't feel, but people don't feel the connection to them. So a really interesting question for me is how we can potentially, by understanding our value chains and supply chains better, locating them, internalizing them in a single place, actually develop an architecture that has more of a sense of place and is more of a kind of new vernacular for architecture.
And just as a follow-up question for later in the debate, but would that also flatten the smiley? Just, I don't know, it could be, I'd like to. But, and Arthur, in going circular, because some of the things that you have worked with was also the last time that you were with me on a debate, you actually highlighted and emphasized the way in which the global value chain was detrimental to transitioning and also create a circular construction and a circular economy. And in going circular, you had that very, very wonderful moment where you share with us, those of us who've seen it, you share with us how you used to go to the food market as a child and saw that the utensils and the wrapping was actually not disposables, but would be reused. And the contrast to that, when you went to the States as a scholar, Stefano has also been to the States as a scholar. And the contrast to the fast food industry and the way everything was mini packaged and thrown away. So my question to you, when you hear both Stefano and Finn talk about the city, the urban, and how we can transition the city with the role of architecture, what are your reflections on that?
No, thank you again for inviting me to this debate. I don't want to start agreeing with everybody, but let me just start by being a little bit more provocative. The first thing is, it's so easy to answer Stefano's question, all those, and actually just one simple answer: we should just all die and stop the economy for a couple of days. And this actually happened during the pandemic. And I was just talking to Geanne that, during pandemic, in going circular, most of hospitals, we had to build a hospital for COVID center because we're missing a lot of negative pressure and positive pressure surgery room, negative pressure containment room. So the government decided to build a COVID center, but we could not import any of the material. So we are forced to use the trash in Taipei and build a hospital that has 100 beds in it and all the COVID patients. Okay, so I think this is kind of like so the answer is very simple: just stop the economy quickly, and then stop importing anything, and then you have no supply chain problem. Then you have no circularity problem because you have to figure out how to build everything within a proximity of your construction sites. So I know, like, and then what's the true cost of buildings? What's the true cost of this? The problem is our current architecture educations or engineering education did not tell you that you can use mud to build your house. You cannot use shit to waterproof your surface anymore, right? Okay, but that's what happened before, so then now I zoom in a little bit quicker, like not quicker, like what happened recently. We recently built 7 upcycling plants around the world. These upcycling plants are literally in the middle of a city. There's one just opened in Taipei, one in Singapore, one in Thailand, we just opened one in, guess where? Saudi Arabia, Neom City. And we have one that's not operational in Milan. We have another one in Shanghai, but obviously not operational now. And potentially we have another one Japan and Hong Kong and Milan reopen again. So what the circular hub, or we call it cut emission hub, is doing is that it's trying to use trash. We try to provide the technology and manufacturing capability to be able to build high performance, long durable building product made only with local resources, and just 2 production line, 12,000 square meters. And we just need to build a lot more of this, and that's it.
I think it's excellent, and I do remember that we also ended up talking a little bit about the educational system in our last debate. So I think we'll come back to that, because it's always nice to have a magic wand for others to do. But Geanne, we have just heard the solution now. We'll stop importing. So as a business strategist, how will you now assist companies in our various countries adopt and transition to this?
I would say, just like Arthur just said, it's actually quite easy. We just have to learn from the genius of place. You know, nature is all around us, and it's already functioning for more than 3.8 billion years. In the documentary Going Circular, where Arthur is featured, also Janine Benyus is featured. And as Saskia van der Muizenberg, also one of your former earlier guests, I think the last webinar, probably shared around factories as a forest of interface or cities as a forest. And that concept we can apply for businesses as well. So just see what is locally available, which can be waste, but also bio-based materials. Here in the Netherlands, we see a very strong development towards bio-based materials, whereas I would like to say, let's see whether we can use bio-based waste streams mostly. We have been importing, I believe, Canadian trees as in pellets to heat our some houses, and that was originally seen as sustainable. So therefore, the local approach, as Arthur recommended, I feel is really crucial. And there is so much we can learn from cities as well, from the nature that is surrounding us. We are nature ourselves, you know. That's why it really worked very well during COVID to go outside. And apparently, we already have forgotten that it was so healthy and increasing our well-being. And greening cities is quite crucial. There is a nice publication about the Symbiotic City, elaborating on that from a researcher at the Wageningen University here in the Netherlands, but also the social dimension. And I really liked when looking at the website of Finn, what they did for the city of Malmö is really involving the people as well, because this inclusive circular regenerative approach is what we see in nature as well. We all know the forest, but we all forget about the mycorrhiza creating this wood-wide web, exchanging resources, but also caring for each other and being used as a communication channel. So there's a lot to learn from nature and the genius of place. And from a city perspective, I saw that Stefano also referred to Kate Raworth's donut. And people were asking, hey, what can I do? Having the city donut as a perspective, bringing in the local and global perspective, maybe before we shut everything down, at least being conscious about that and looking at both the social and ecological perspective is really great. And that's why I opened up the screen just to close off my remark, because we are focusing also a little bit on cities here. Being in an architectural place and with an architect focusing on cities, because Janine Benyus suggested Kate Raworth for the City Donut to ask this 21st century question: how can our city be a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? I would say all life. Because when a bird builds a nest in a tree, it takes care not to destroy the surrounding forest in the process. So how can humanity also learn to create settlements, big and small, that promote the well-being of their inhabitants while respecting the wider living communities in which they are embedded? So I hope that helps.
Well, it certainly sounds easy, but before we close the borders, as it were, what there must be some value to actually interacting across the globe. So before we shut down completely, I just have to ask also to my Danish experts in the audience, the last time I checked, we're not self-sufficient in materials. So are you ready for shutting down and going local? Yeah, there's a little bit of nodding, there's a little bit, all right. So Stefano, if we were to actually do this and say we will abbreviate the global value chain, what you've also shown is actually that there are people that really lose out in the global value chain. Will they then regain their momentum and have a better life?
So let me just shuffle around a little bit. I wanted to make 2 points that are related to, I was inspired by some of the comments that our discussant brought onto the place. One is a reflection on what I call, I just made this up, so it's not that I call it because I studied it, the privilege of local. The privilege of local I see as the privilege in some ecosystems and economic systems where you have a variety of sources of materials or foods in which you can have a more local economy because I come from Italy. If I eat local, I can eat pretty much everything. If I eat local in Denmark, well, climate change is helping you, right? You have wine now. But you know, the sort of portfolio of things you can eat is also much smaller. When I used to live in the US, going to the local farmer's market was great, but it was also expensive. So what are the cost implications for the final user or consumer of locality at a time when we got used to having access to things at a certain price given the income that we have? It's easy for me to say, I totally agree, let's go local, because I have a good salary, I have good education, I have time, despite the fact that academics work a lot, I do have time to go and seek out these things. If you're working at 2 jobs to make a living, like many people are in the middle, lower classes in the US, not only do I have the money, but you don't have the time to go and seek out all these beautifully romantic local things, which I do all the time. When I go down to Italy, my Saturday market in my village is the end of the world. It's like I'm in peace with the world and everything. Everything is quote unquote local. Local means that it could come from Sicily and being grown with slave labor, but it is sold as local, right? So even in the local, we need to be a bit careful. I work in South Africa, a lot of very justified concerns with labor there. And I'm like, well, you know, come to Italy and see what happens in the tomato fields, or then you come and tell me whether that is better or not. But I'm digressing here. So one that I want to place a question mark of trying to understand the distributive effects of local circularity, which as a philosophical idea I really, really like. But in practice, I think there may be some issues, as I said, in terms of inequality and access. The second point I wanted to make is that what we learned, what I thought we learned during COVID is that we can live differently. And we are all lucky here, we're here, so we didn't die or got really sick. Or if we did, we recovered. In Denmark, we had pretty good handling of the situation. We had vaccines. Many other places, they didn't have vaccines and they didn't handle it properly. But still, we stopped traveling. We had more time for ourselves, unless we were sick, in a good way, right? Good life. And I thought, you know what, now it's the change. A lot of people said this is going to change everything. And I really would like to believe that. And I really hope. But I'm a bit cynical. I'm a pragmatist, but also know what sort of the human nature embedded into our system of organizing the economy. So it's not about humans, it's how we respond to incentives and all that. And indeed, as soon as the doors were open, I mean, air travel has gone back. There's like whiplash effect. You know, we can't get enough now, me included. Okay, I'm not passing judgment here. And so then it brings me back to how do we rethink, you know, materials for building? How do we rethink how we live our city? And then make choices about, no, there's a lot in Copenhagen I can do. I don't really need to go to Berlin or to Thailand, right? And I would really like, you know, to open up that question about what is it that can make us do that change, that behavioral change, which we did impose from above or self-imposed for preservation during COVID. In relation to building materials, sustainability, local materials, I made a mistake of starting a big renovation project in Italy just before COVID. The government there came up with this super bonus, and so I was one of the first ones actually, because we had the plan and we made the paperwork, and so we could get a lot of the green stuff covered, you know. heat pumps and solar, you name it, the whole shebang. And I chose a company as a contractor because they had good reputation, and I thought that the owner really cared about sustainability. So you know what happened, right? No metal, no wood, no nothing, nobody's working, and when they work, they don't have the materials. And so I would get these shipments, and I'm not there all the time. So I would go and I find the wood for the new roof. We had to redo everything. And I'm asking, it's like, so where is the FSC certification? I asked for sustainable materials. And the guy comes to me, he's like, I have wood. I have wood for you. And I'm like, yeah, but I have wood. And so he said, shut up, right? So there's this kind of thing that where we were so concerned about this, and then with the multiple crises now, one of which is the climate, but with everything else, with gas, Italy has opened some coal stations, you name it, with energy. Then all of a sudden there is everything else that's going on at the same time, and then I had to accept the second best. Because if I wanted a roof, I needed to use that wood. And so I said, oh, okay, right. I think I'm going to stop here because I don't want it to be more than this.
Finn, how can you actually, as a public procurement, ensure that you don't end up in the same situation where it's not one house, but let's just, for argument's sake, say that you want to transition the schools?
Yeah, I mean, if we start on the kind of social dimension, because I think in some ways the tools we have can make more of a direct impact there, because we're not talking about supply chains made of things, but we're talking about direct relationships between people in the city. When I worked for the Mayor of London, we worked very hard on building social value, equality, diversity, and inclusion into our procurement frameworks, so that you didn't just judge the bids from consultants based on quality and cost, but we built in up to 20% for social value as a starting point, which arguably could go further. And what that meant is that increasingly we channeled the jobs that were created through growth, through built environment, like physical growth, into local communities, into local economies, and supported the building of both local skills, but actually ultimately local supply chains as well, by rewarding companies and organizations that help to grow grassroots level engagement in building and development. And that falls into a kind of wider school of thought. In the UK, we talk a lot about community wealth building, where you see policy as a way of both using the existing resources, and I don't just mean materials, but human resources as well, the skills and expertise and organizations that already exist in a place, and making regeneration happen through those local organizations. Now, that has an effect, and you can see from places like Preston that have now driven community wealth building for a long period of time, where they've channeled all of that public spending, billions of pounds worth of public spending, not just from councils, municipalities, but also from hospitals and schools, towards local economies. That can really have a transformative effect in terms of equality. But to do it with materials is a whole other level, because we're talking about much longer supply chains and this kind of I suppose the chains that you've described that are global in reach. The longer those chains are, arguably the kind of greater the inequalities that sit at the other end of it, at least to my eyes. It's a very kind of crude assessment of it. And the less visible those supply chains, the harder they are to affect. So what we really need in terms of the world of public procurement is an economic framework that supports us making a sensible choice around local supply, but doesn't prevent import and export. Because right at the minute in the UK, refurbishment is taxed at 20%. Like refurbishing a historical building, you're taxed 20% on that, roughly. Building something new is not taxed at all. So the whole taxation system works against the idea of reuse and kind of working with existing materials. Now, if we had a taxation system that got closer to the true externalities, the true costs, all the way down the supply chain, global in reach, and help to balance out those inequalities, then we could make more informed choices about, well, shall I should I specify that beam from China, or should I start to invest in local cross-laminated timber production in Scandinavia and help to build that industry a bit more? And that gradually over time would start to build a supply chain that means we can get closer to this kind of new local vernacular, which won't ever be 100% building Copenhagen in Copenhagen, but at least we'll have more awareness of the provenance of our materials in the same way that we have more awareness now of the provenance of our food.
And Geanne, you have raised your hand. I see Arthur nodding as well, but please comment, and it's wonderful to see you raise your hand. It makes it easier here. But thank you. Yes?
I had actually a reaction on Stefano, but also now just on Finn sharing about the tax system, because there's a beautiful NGO already advocating for years for a shift. I actually already shared it with Arthur, for shifting our tax system from labor to materials, you know, because indeed it's not making sense to tax actually labor, or this example in the UK, you know, taxating refurbishment and new building not. It's really astonishing. So there's really something governments could do, from my perspective, in an easy way to change that, and also make the choices for businesses the first choice secondary materials, so not primary materials. With regards to the local perspective, of course, bringing up the social dimension and the fair dimension is absolutely true, but it also links to what is enough. We always want to have strawberries for Christmas, you know, is that really needed, as an example? So also here the business perspective is actually, you know, maybe grown in our education system, because scaling up is seen as making one thing bigger all over the place. And actually the recycling hubs Arthur shared already show that scaling across a more distributive approach, having the same solution on a more local scale is really working. I really like the work, for example, of the seaweed company. They really consciously grow seaweed in a very limited scale, pitting the type of seaweed and the skill to the context, the location they are growing the seaweed. So they don't grow a huge, or are not creating a huge seaweed farm at one place, but they're really taking a distributive approach. Close off, an example of a global fashion company, bringing the industry perspective, because they suffered indeed of hiccups in their supply chain, to put it mildly. It was a fashion brand, and they sourced everything from the Far East. And nobody wants to get anyone out of business, but I think if we take a more local approach, that would be possible. And then we get into Stefano's point, it probably will be more expensive. And actually this global procurement responsible did a math, you know, including the cost of sourcing in Europe for Europe, in Asia for Asia, and in America for America. And it turned out, when taking into account delivery, shipment timing, everything which you normally business smart would take into account, that even although indeed the price points of producing something in Turkey, for example, for Europe, and in the US for the Americas, the initial costs might be higher, but if you look at the total picture, it actually, you know, would work. And he brought up the suggestion into the company, and then they said, yeah, but we want to have the exact the same look everywhere around the world, so we want to have production in one place. That's what I mean, you know, it's because of what we want, our expectations, and that's why on an individual base we can make a difference, to say we don't care, you know, we are okay with having only strawberries in the summer.
I think it's your last example was really spot on in terms of my question was actually that, as we have also in the global value chain and also in some of the post-Second World War urban designs, we've seen that it's like the commodification, one size fits all. And some of the things also in what you're saying, Arthur, and what you've all been addressing, is the awareness of being embedded in a local context. So with that, when one size doesn't fit all anymore, do we produce accordingly? Do we have the knowledge that it takes to actually be embedded within, be it a local, a regional context? You were mentioning the mud and the shit to be that literal, Arthur. But one of the things that we've also had in some of the architects sharing the regenerative architecture is that local materials and local geography and physicality actually has a huge influence and impact on which local materials we should use in construction.
Yes.
Do we have the knowledge that it takes to then source those local, to choose the right materials?
Again, now we're back to the education question.
I know, but I
I
promised
know
you.
yeah, and then that education question comes down to what Stefano and Finn was mentioning. You need to be able to know what impact you're having, right? So, and I know a lot of people are saying, by the way, this standardization of calculating carbon footprint is standardizing. It's ISO 14040. And now there's an accounting system, level 1, level 2, scope 1, scope 2. It's already literally accounting-wise, international accounting standard-wise, standardized it. Okay, so pretty much there's no debate. I don't understand why there's professors still debating about how to calculate carbon footprint. It's an LCA analysis based on ISO 14000. Everybody know how to calculate it. If you have a power plant, you will be able to calculate that. You have a long supply chain, you can calculate that. And it's all in the computer software. It's all, and all the database are internationally linked. So you can have any type of spiders that fish those data as quickly as possible as you want, instantly. So technology-wise, on the data level, on the algorithm level, is really, it's already there. Except whether professor in these universities have head thick enough to get around those learnings, okay, away from the aesthetics a little bit. I'm not saying don't teach aesthetics, but at least teach a little bit something that's useful, right? Like this is the future of Big Mac is going to be judged on this nutrition facts, right? Please get down to the basic nutrition facts a little bit. Stop talking about urbanism, these big topics, and you know, I'm from Cornell, I'm from Harvard. They still teach. I don't want to ditch. I love my schools, by the way, but then they're still teaching, like, you know, Collage City. Just so you guys know, I don't know if you guys know that book. Colin Rowe is still there. Okay, I understand. Figure ground is important. Corbusier is important. Great. Okay, that's like for me, that's history. You know, it's a history lessons. But I mean, let's get down to what you design has an impact. What you specify on one material has an impact, and right away you see the difference in carbon footprint. And by the way, we do that on everything we do. And then simply, you're talking about 200% savings, at least 80 to 90% savings, just using local material. So I don't know. And you can calculate that into how much energy footprint you're saving locally. Okay, by, let's say, coal-fired power plant. You can shut down coal-fired power plant for hours just by choosing one material for your damn floor, you know? You see what I mean? That
Yes.
These are quite real numbers, but I think the education system just not yet. The students they produce are not producing. It's just a basic. I know everyone talk about it, but when you ask them to actually just say, okay, let's calculate this carbon footprint. So everybody come in the office, they have to go through this 2-week training to go through a carbon footprint analysis program, you know? So I'm just saying, because I just came back from Cornell too, teaching after the pandemic, and then Yeah, one professor after how many years is starting to talk about the same thing, but you have 40 other professors talking about something else, right? Like talking about how David hang his clothes on the left slightly because Ponte counterposto, all this Italian. I mean, it's fine. It's great. I'm great. Yeah. It's like, but come on, I,
It's great. We have both Finn and Stefano have kind of said, "Oh yeah, we have a comment to that."
Yeah.
Finn, we'll start with you.
No, I thought what you described is so familiar, and I can't help thinking back to coming straight out of architecture school, having been taught about Colin Rowe and Corb, going straight into the office of the people who designed this building, making stuff out of blue foam without any idea of what it would be made of, and then magically it turns into buildings like this. And what I think is so fascinating about what you say is that actually by looking into the provenance, understanding where these materials come from and how we can work with them, you actually get a much more interesting aesthetic out of it. And we can see a clear relationship between Malmö's historic architecture and the very geology of the place it sits on. The word Malmö comes from basically Malmhög, or pile of gravel, which says a lot about the place. But it's built on this kalkbrott, it's got this chalk, which had a clear relationship to the putz that was used on the facade, led, of course, into the evolution of the concrete industry and played a very big role in that in Sweden, but also the relationship between the mud and the bricks. So there was this sort of very clear sense of place that came from that close exchange between materials, but also trades over the water with Denmark. The challenge now,
like vocations.
Yeah, exactly. And the challenge now is that we may not necessarily want to start up the chalk mine again and start producing more cement in Malmö. So how do we find those kind of new economies of links to the geology, the existing resources in Malmö? And a lot of that is working with the city that's already there. And I think a lot of the really exciting projects in Malmö that feel most Malmö now, that I see on my desk in front of me, are actually projects that are using återbruk, so reuse of materials. And I think of Varvstaden and Lena's work, Lena Brix and Lendang, are creating this Materialbank, which is an incredible physical bank of all of the dismantled industrial sheds from Kockum's industrial ship production yards. And that, talking about making second-hand materials the first choice, that is the first place that architects are looking at now when they're designing new buildings in Varvstaden. And it's making Varvstaden out of Varvstaden. And those buildings feel connected to the history and the materiality and the character of the place. And they're so much more exciting for it. And I think what we've got to catch up with as an architecture profession, and particularly on the public sector side, is having a form of regulation, a planning system that can keep pace with that slightly more iterative, slightly more improvised way of piecing together a building that comes from looking at closer a context and using that context to form a building, rather than looking at a perfect drawing or a perfect blue foam model and thinking what we build that out of later. And for me, when 80 to 90% of our built environment is going to be there in 2050, that kind of shift of mentality from thinking about architecture and planning as always being about creating the new to being about taking care of the existing is the most exciting shift that's happening in the profession. And just last point here, I love the fact that in Swedish you call a department a förvaltning. Förvaltning means kind of maintaining, taking care of things. And actually I think that's a really great way of thinking about the practice of or where the practice of architecture and planning needs to go.
And I think it ties in quite well with what you also emphasized earlier, Stefano, in terms of the structural conditions, in terms of the role of regulation. One might then kind of ask, can we change it fast enough to make the changes necessary? But that may be for another debate. But Stefano, you also had a few comments.
I actually have a question for my colleagues and also here in the room of the built environment. Because it ties in with the locality discussion that we had earlier, and also how to make supply chains shorter or more local. And there is a lot of talk now about green hydrogen, right? And green hydrogen is, could be and has been sold as one of the possibilities in which we can decarbonize cement production and steel production, which are huge, have huge impacts globally on CO2 emissions and, of course, are important building materials. So hydrogen, essentially, you can take water. So if wherever you have water, you can pump out water. Then you use a lot of energy to decouple the hydrogen in it, liquefy it, then burn it as a fuel. And the product of that burning is steam. So from water to water, perfect, right? And we have plenty of water. In the middle, a lot of energy, and we have to get more energy out of hydrogen than we put in. And green hydrogen means that energy has to be from renewables. Otherwise, we just shift the problem, right? So if we are able to, in different locations, right, from geothermal, from hydroelectric, solar, wind, right, then that could provide, and that's the way that I've been told, a huge kind of moment of disruption in the sense that that production doesn't have to be centralized. It can be really decentralized. There are economies of scale, but not so huge that you would have, oil extraction. You happen to live in that country that has oil, like whether it's Qatar or Norway. With hydrogen, okay, if you're a landlocked country, too bad. But except for that, there's a lot of possibilities. And I wonder in this space of the built environment whether this is seen as a serious way to go or not. And yeah.
All right, Geanne, since that you had comments, how do you find that? Is that the way to go? Because that way we could continue producing.
Anyway.
One of the ways. We could stay abreast with the steel and concrete production.
Yeah, I was not reacting on that particular solution because I think hydrogen can be part of the solution, but not necessarily always is. But a decentralized energy source is always smart. I think there are many other alternative energy sources locally available. We can use the heat of surface water. That is being looked at, energy of tides, and then it's always said being too expensive, but too expensive to what extent? And I think that's actually the essence in general. Coming back to actually the last remark of Finn with regard to the social dimension of architectural design. I think in general, whether you are a business or a city architect, so making construction or creating a product or a service, the important thing is that you are generous, or call it regenerative. But in biomimicry, they coined the term generous design, and I actually like that one. Because if you are generous for your environment, whether it's in your supply chain, to your products, to the people you touch, to the buildings you create, and you bring people together for the greater good, then we don't have to talk or to wane anymore about the tragedy of the commons, but we can start a discussion about the happiness of the commons. And bringing that together, the commons, creating spaces where people meet in cities, or as a business, seeing how you can actually increase well-being in the communities you are touching, whether it's in your supply chain or where your headquarters or production location is. I think that's key in the years to come, and actually today. So call it generous design or a regenerative approach, but just making this world a better place, whatever you are doing. That's, I think, what the essence is. So it's called the Commons. So let's go and work on that together.
I think that sounds very, very wonderful. And it's also time to ask for questions and comments, because we're getting to that time. Yes, we have, and we will have a microphone coming your way.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, I'm Christina, and my question is like this long. I'm going to try and make it sound intelligible. So all this reimagining and redesigning is something that takes time. And I'm not an architect or within architecture. Sometimes when I take the train by the central train station, you can see these new concrete monsters being built. I have a PhD in organization, and I'm a time scholar. My partner is a carpenter. So we talk a lot about these things. And we're just wondering, because we know, so there's so much knowledge, there's so much we know, we can share it here. And there's this disconnect between what we know and what we see going on all the time, including how we deal with these things in our own lives, because we more or less continue as we're used to. And so when I talk to other people or companies or whatever, one thing that's for sure is that people really don't have time to think too much about these things and to make these transitions. And I am completely in agreement with the fact that we need to transform a lot of things around in the educational system, a lot of institutional frameworks and so forth. But whilst we're doing that, we also need to do something in the operations of today. So if you are a manager or whatever, working and wanting to do something with this, what do you do? So my question is, do you have any examples of organizations that have sort of been able to carve out or reclaim time in order to think out new solutions, be it in hubs or in, what does it take for an organization to go about opening up this space? Thank you.
It's a good question. Geanne, I was thinking that you might have some examples.
Yeah, of course, of my background, being head of sustainable development at Interface. I've worked at that company for 17 years. And what we did there is actually that we literally asked for help, which was empowering everyone in the organizations, because it was not only asking for help to the experts, but really literally everyone in the organization. You're an expert in the field of marketing, in engineering, in sales. We want to become restorative. Now we actually raised the bar to creating a climate fit for life. So I always say from learning to nature, from nature to functioning as nature, but literally creating space. And you are asking for that space, but I would say take that space, because there's nothing in contradiction with the things we are doing every day. It's actually enhancing and will make our life more beautiful, but also as a professional will make your work better, more inspired and more future resilient. So create that space yourself. You don't have to wait for anyone or any person within the organization to grant you that space. But for organizations, my advice would be to literally ask that help question, because that's creating space for people to do the things they feel they should be doing.
And Arthur, as you are actually also helping other organizations, what would your advice be to reduce the disconnect, as I heard it?
I think earlier, generous, I think is a very amazing comment. And I never used that word, maybe because in business, like every board member, every investors is always talking about scamming somebody, that's just the nature of in the business world, and so, how do you increase that learning? Because, for example, like if you are in this school, you're in the organization, people constantly telling you to be more efficient, or more efficient to do what? You're forgetting what you have to be, just stop smoking while someone's doing this, and this is causing someone else's cancer. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, this is a type of debate we used to have when I was still a student. People still can smoke indoors, right? But in the organization, I think it's also very similar. So, yeah, I think if you can instill that a little bit of goodness, that generosities and allows the organization to kind of think on that direction a little bit. But the key is also the stakeholder of that organization. That's why I mentioned, I mean, my board members, they're good people, like my investor, they're good people. Yeah. But the problem is when it comes to business, they all say, yeah, go there, attack, it's like, it's always attack, so I'm just saying, like, this is, I'm not saying even good people, when they are put into a different framework, they are no longer become generous, right? Okay, so I think we never really, in the last, I don't know how many years, we have turning into this weird group of people. No one's trying to be generous. Everyone trying to be extra stingy. That's why you get the problem of squeezing down your supply chain using, you know what we call Europeans when they come to Asia and buy stuff? They call you guys with a big hat, a moral, what do you call it? A moral imperative with the intention of scamming people. Okay, that's what it is. In whatever, in Chinese, in Cantonese, or Japanese, Korean, I'm sure that you have all the same name, because that is what it is. But the problem is, they're good people. Everyone's actually, in general, I think by nature, is good people. So how do we instill a little bit of that generosities, and I think things gets a lot better.
Yeah. And Finn, a generous city?
Yeah, no, that resonates. I had a conversation with a developer a while ago challenging their model, and they said, well, look, we're all making the right decisions in the short term, but we're all conscious that it's the wrong thing over the long term. And when you talk about the frameworks we're operating in, then so much of it is back down to time. And I think in some ways, I think your question is the core of it, because we urgently need to think much slower. And at least in the world of development, we have the model of development economics, for most house building at least, is based on how quickly you can turn over capital into receipts through selling stuff, and then churn it around and build something else. And there's very few organizations that are responsible for the long-term, going back to externalities, even within their red line boundary, even within their site, they're not responsible for their externalities over time, if that even makes sense to economics.
Yeah.
For me, actually, it's really interesting what you mentioned, Geanne, because I think I wrote an essay which got terrible marks back in like 2006 about interface, if it's the same interface, and a model of breaking the connection between architecture as a product and architecture as a form of a service or performance. So interface don't sell you the tiles, they sell you the fact that you want a decent floor. And you buy into that, and over time, they find the most sustainable solution for that. Now, if the architecture industry could go from being paid by a percentage of the total construction costs, where they're actually incentivized to waste more money building stuff because it's the budget becomes bigger, so their percentage gets bigger, to being paid by the amount of money they save by not building stuff in the first place, or just using existing resources better, you could properly reward the value of architecture, the value of design, which is that common sense, lateral thinking, ingenuity, and I think it would get past a lot of the conversations that I have on a daily basis, which frustrate me so much, which is that quality is seen to be a cost in the short term. Of course, when you play things out over the very long term, investing in quality, investing in sustainability is cheaper. But the problem is just we're talking about different timescales. So if we could get a model of development economics, a model of being paid as architects that was sufficiently long, and we need it very quickly, then we can start to make sensible decisions about what actually costs money.
They're nodding, and a question. I'll get back to you, Geanne. We'll get a question. We're getting And I just need to, if we have questions from the chat, we'll take that afterwards.
Thank you very much, all of you, for some very interesting talks. So I was thinking about something, which is that we've been talking about donut economics, and we've been talking about that we basically all agree on what direction we need to go as a society. And we need some sort of concrete way to do this. We need some tools to get there. And there is a very simple tool, basically, which is within climate change, for instance, which is carbon taxation. It's very simple. And everything that we're talking about would be done if we had carbon taxation, right? You wouldn't build those buildings which were harming the climate. You wouldn't, if you had the right carbon taxation, you would be able to refurbish old buildings instead of building new buildings. Everything would, it's a very, very simple tool which would change a lot. And it's very concrete in a way, right? And it's already on the political agenda. So in Denmark, for instance, right now, there is a lot of debate about taxing the agricultural industry. And for me, the biggest problem right now is that you have a lot of people who have gone from being climate deniers to being climate delayers. So there's a huge amount of lobbyism going on right now. And just to tie back to your point, Stefano, it's basically about power. It's about power. It's not about right intentions. It's about people trying to stop change or delay change. They know it's coming, but they're just trying to delay it as much as possible to preserve their own power. So what I would be interested in hearing from you was, how can we, as people who know that this is the right direction, how can we create social movements or political power structures that can force these very necessary taxations to actually becoming real? Because I don't see any other solution, and I think it's actually the right tool to use. So how can we create the power to create this generous society? How can we create this political momentum that we need to do this? Because it is very concrete. It's not something very abstract.
I agree with you. And I actually think that carbon taxation is coming. Yes. And the push is a desperate push because I think that the EU level, and especially in the Northern Europe in general, it is on the agenda, it is going to happen, and this time is going to happen relatively soon. So anything that is counter-lobbying is a sort of desperate move. Now, in what we can do together with journalism, keep the debate open in terms of what is happening and for the benefit of whom, right? And NGOs that are more kind of radical to keep hammering on that point, so that it doesn't get delayed and normalized within the political cycle. I think in Denmark now, for example, despite the lobbying from the agricultural groups, you do have a broad coalition that is somewhat green. But there are very many differences inside in relation to what is actually green and just. And one of the issues that you're highlighting is a tricky one, even though the sheer number of people in that sector is pretty small. They do have a lot of lobbying power, and the association is very powerful and has been quite aggressive on researchers as well. In certain things you're not allowed to say, even if you found. So I think keep engaging and also work with if you have connections in the political parties and sort of. I'm not a social movement organizer, so I don't know how to do that. I do provide ideas to those people who are very good at it, and I think it's also an okay division of labor, right?
And Finn, I was wondering if you have any experiences, because in London, as I understand it, there is actually a social movement against demolition in terms of really pushing, and it's coming from architects as well, to change the taxation in terms of that it's a better investment, as it were, to demolish and then build new rather than keeping the existing building.
Yeah.
So in terms of that bottom-up push, as we're being asked for, I was wondering if you have any experiences and examples.
Yeah, very live public debates about the demolition of very big public buildings or buildings in the public realm in London, Marks and Spencer's on Oxford Street, the Museum of London, and those debates being played out on the front pages of newspapers. Should they be demolished? What are the calculations that are justifying this? And I think that definitely helps. It actually, in some ways, also has its roots in grassroots or bottom-up activism, demonstration around demolition being opposed for social reasons. If you look at London's social housing stock, built mostly in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and a big wave of demolitions that happened in London over the last 10 or 15 years, and huge opposition to that on the grounds of kind of social cleansing or gentrification. And it's interesting to see how those two kind of campaigns are actually aligning themselves. And I think that, to take that back, I think connecting it back to the question, I mean, as you might have told, I'm not an economist and a very limited and very crude understanding of this. I mean, what I hear people talk about is the risk of carbon reductivism, where you're just swapping out one currency with another. And certainly when I think of Kate Raworth's donut, I do wonder what else is going to get pushed around the donut if all the focus is on counting carbon. Are we going to get other forms of inequalities pushed around the world, or around supply chains, or to other bits of society? So to put it the only way I can think of it in a very crude and simple way is really you just want to tax anything that's damaging those planetary boundaries. You just kind of tax up to the planetary boundaries, and a big part of that is carbon, but obviously there's other things that you also need to tax. And if we could get a model based on whether it's the Stockholm one or the donut that work like that, then you could start to see real change. And that is happening in cities. I think the example of Amsterdam is really encouraging when you see like real physical initiatives happening as a result of the donut economics model being adopted at a citywide scale. We just need to do that across the world now.
Geanne, you also have a comment?
Yes, indeed. Finn, you will certainly like the book on the Symbiotic City. I already put it in the chat. But I'd like to bring in the element of language, because I think it's also a way how we talk to each other and which words we are using. I agree with you, Finn, as well, that we need to have a holistic approach. So carbon taxation is really a smart thing to do, but indeed we also need to take into account this notion of restoration and regeneration, which is, I think, crucial. We need to double nature to solve the issues we are facing as human beings. But language, I think, is really crucial. And Per Espen Stoknes, a Norwegian psychologist, has a great TED talk on how to change, the words we are using in the light of climate change or non-sustainable behavior into a far more proactive and more appealing language. And in that context, storytelling is essential. And I like to close off, if I may, Pernille, with a story about the whales. I don't know whether it was already shared before in one of the previous talks, but I think it's so powerful because it shows what we could do. Because natural systems are creating abundance, and whales are actually contributing to their own feedstock, krill, because they defecate in the upper layers of the ocean, and therefore the plankton is growing abundantly, which is the main food source of the krill, the small fishes the whales like. But at the same time, this plant plankton also captures the carbon. Our oceans are our largest lungs to capture carbon. So this shows we can have it all. If Interface, a stock-listed American company, already can work on what we call circular economy today, learning from nature since the 90s, I would say if it can work within that, at that time, within that particular company, I would say it can work everywhere.
I think that's a wonderful example. We've 2 questions left, and Nikolai is one of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Nikolai from the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. And today we have this event because it's about regenerative cities. And we'll call it The Future is the final event of a long series of events. So my questions for you, if you could give a final remark about what will I experience when I go into a city in 2080, 50 years from now, and look and feel and see the city as a citizen. What will be the biggest change that you could see if it should be all this we are talking about, these regenerative changes and transformations?
Oh, okay. Arthur, what do we, when we enter your city in 2080, what do we enter?
We recently won 3 major public tender in Taiwan. It's because the government mandated 20% recycled material. So technically, and it obviously has to be from trash. So pretty much you will see next time you come to Taipei, I can bring you to these giant, in the middle of a city site, that's all these buildings that's made from trash. So I guess, yes, my answer is always the same. All the building has to be made from local material. And then I hope, that's obviously a positive vision. And we are already using non-cement based cement, which is what we call just basically geocement. That's not a real word, but then there's a lot of people using base, which is chemical solution to substitute for the curing of the cement. And so many of the building, including the structure, are already trying to do maximum allow geocement possible for some of the building that we are building. So, okay, so and of course, I hope that many of the future cities have highly efficient energy system that's able to switch between many different sources of energy. And I'm sure I'm sure many of you guys, especially coming from architecture background, do have this futuristic image in the back of your head in a very sustainable way, surrounded by biodiverse plants, farming integrated, etc. But I just want to give you another version. The other version is what we're recently involved in Neom City. That's supposed to be finished exactly the date that you were mentioning. Okay. And the first phase at least. And I think what's very interesting is it is a city of the future, but also of the past in a way. It's designed for apocalyptic cities. Yeah. So it's a completely facing off, like basically cut off, self island in itself. Okay. Trying to be completely independent. It's a giant wall, 2 walls that runs 78 or 76 kilometers with 200 meters in width. It's completely self-contained in the middle of a desert. So, you get this 2 gigantic, more biophilic version, or this giant gash in the landscape, right? Which is completely designed for end of the world, basically. So I guess you're going to get 2 visions. And I think the world is definitely moving into both directions at the same time.
Yes. Finn?
Maybe we shouldn't be trying to accelerate the latter direction, would be my opinion, certainly. Try and avoid helping that vision of the Neom City future, because it's a bleak one. I mean, I think a short answer on Malmö, I'll try and keep it short. 2080, hopefully it'll be a long time since the last completely new building was built in Malmö. So in some ways, the city will seem very familiar because so much of it, the fabric, will be stuff that's already there right now. And yet, at the same time, I hope it actually feels very foreign and unusual and not like any other city in Sweden, not like Copenhagen, because right now, everyone talks about Malmö's held up as an example of, it's, for its size, one of the most diverse cities in the world. 184 different nationalities, only 350,000 people. And that diversity can be tasted in Malmö's food. I'm really proud that our national dish is the falafel in Malmö. It can be heard in Malmö's music. It can be seen in a lot of our culture, fashion, production that goes on in Malmö, but is not visible in architecture. And I think actually if you have a form of a new local vernacular for Malmö that is not only grounded in the material resources of the place, but also the human resources of the place, and where so much of the built environment is generated by those individuals thinking resourcefully and creatively about what to use around them, then you should have a built environment that in turn feels a lot richer and has a closer connection to the culture of that place. So that's what I'm looking forward to, is a form of architecture that when you arrive in Malmö, it's like nothing else, and people will go to Malmö to see it because it is so extraordinary.
I'd like to visit that. Stefano?
I'm not an urban planner, I'm not an architect, so I'm in awe with all these visions, and I don't really have the competence on the research side to contribute. However, I do have my politics, and so I'll bring them in. In addition to all these beautiful visions of the future, I would like to see cities where private ownership of modes of transportation is not allowed, where you have mass public transport, CO2 neutral, transportation services, even individual point to point, so that we get rid of those ugly cars in the streets.
All right, and Geanne, I don't see cars in the picture I think you have shared.
Yeah, indeed. This is a picture from Stefano Buri, but I actually do agree with the pictures that were painted with all three of the others, because this could be a city anywhere, and I do believe also using local materials and bringing in the local architecture. We should embrace that diversity. But what I would like to share with this picture is actually, that our city should function as a good functioning ecosystem. So cooling the environment, creating space for biodiversity, absorbing water, so not having issues when there is a lot of heavy rains. Of course, also feeding the people living in it. And at the same time contributing to people's well-being, because we are nature and we feel well when we are surrounded with green and life, since we are live as well. So therefore this picture.
Thank you. And the very last question before we say thank you very much for your patience and participation.
So we have a question from Jacob, who is joining us online, and he would like to know, how does the EU taxonomy connect with levels, EU guidelines for assessment and reporting of sustainability of buildings levels?
That's a lovely question, and Arthur, I'm sure you'd love to answer that for us, but I'm not going to let you, thinking that the EU taxonomy is you're done with that for today, right? So, Finn is saying no. I'm looking, I think Sarah has actually left because we have one of the PhDs in the audience that would be able, and I think she actually had to leave. She hasn't? That's what I said, but that's okay. Do you want to answer, Lisa? Crowdsourcing?
They have tried to make a connection between levels and the taxonomy. The technicalities in the 4 environmental goals, as Karina told us this morning, have not been done yet, so the technical documentation. And they are trying to align those with levels, but we don't know what it looks like. So it's not like you can say, because it's in levels, that it will be in the taxonomy in the same form. So we need to see the technical documentations for the taxonomy for those 4 environmental goals before we can see they are aligned. I'm hoping that they will be, but given that it's EU, you never know. So, sorry, that's the answer for now.
Thank you. So, guys, listen, thank you very, very much. I think the diversity of backgrounds and experiences really just provided us with such a saturated debate and sharing and also pointing to the future. So I think on behalf of everyone here and on our virtual channel, I can just say humbly, thank you. It has been absolutely impressive. And I hope to see both you, Arthur, and you, Geanne, again, because I think it really goes to show what we can learn when we are sharing from across, from be it London to South Africa, to Taipei, to Amsterdam, and all of the experiences you have from your profession and lifetime. I think it has just been really, really impressive. Thank you very, 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 very much.
Thank you.
And those of you who have been in this series of debates with me before know that we actually finish off without clapping, but with you closing your eyes. And some of you may have been thinking, she's not going to do that today. But I will, because Nikolai asked me to. So I will now, and Stefano and Finn, you can trust me, nothing bad will happen to you. You close your eyes, and my voice will just take you to a different realm, and we will fade out, and then we will say thank you for taking us into the future. From matters of the mind to matters of the future, with matters of what is dear to the hearts close to me. We have encompassed discussions, contemplations, geology, biology, physiology, ecology, human matters to the forefront and back to the periphery as matters of urgency prevailed. Sustain, engage, envision, embrace, encourage. We need a new language to cover new grounds of comprehension and shared understanding. Today, hope reigns. And now we will move to a more human natural urge, namely drinks outside.